I'm Paula Ward and this is Easy Knitting Design. This video is on knitting a round neckline. This is the neckline you would choose if you wanted a crew neck or a turtleneck sweater. To work a round neckline, you will first knit the body of your sweater, shape your armholes, and knit up a few inches. On the next knit row, you'll knit across. You'll put a series of stitches on a stitch holder, attach a second ball of yarn, finish knitting the row, turn, purl back, drop this yarn, pick up the first yarn, purl back, turn, and on the next knit row, you'll start working neckline decreases. Now, on the V-neck, we left the last inch of our neckline to be knit straight up. We don't do that on a round neck. You work that decrease edge all the way to the top neck edge. So that means you will also have to combine your short row shaping on your shoulders with your neck edge decreases. Now, I've created other videos on short rows and using those short rows to shape your shoulders, so you might want to watch those videos if you're not familiar with that technique. What we want to know is how many stitches to put on the holder in the center of the sweater on that first row, and how many neck edge decreases to work. So if we were to write this out, we would say, first, start the neck shaping a certain number of inches from the underarm bind off. In other words, from this point right here where you started binding off stitches to shape your armholes. On our next knit row or right side row, we would place a certain number of center stitches on a stitch holder. And finally, we would decrease one stitch each neck edge on the knit rows, in other words, on every right side row, a certain number of times. And we took what I'll call the front neck depth. We put a little pin in our shirt where we wanted the lowest part of our front neckline, and we measured from our top neck down to that pin. Now remember, if we're working a neck ribbing, we have to add the width of that neck ribbing to our front neck depth to create a neck opening deep enough to accommodate our ribbing. We also have our top neck to our underarm bind off. If we subtract this front neck depth from our top neck to underarm yarn distance, we will get the length that we work our front yoke before starting our neckline shaping. So if we take our top neck to underarm yarn, subtract the front neck depth, we will get the length that we knit to the beginning of the neckline. In other words, that number right there. So we can fill in our first blank. I'm going to skip ahead now to number 3 and figure out how many neckline decreases we work on each edge of this neck. First, we want to take this front neck depth in inches and convert it to rows. So we'll do that by multiplying it by our row gauge. So we'll take our front neck depth times our row gauge to get rows in our neck depth. We want to round this number of rows to the nearest even number. This even number of stitches becomes the number of decreased stitches we will work on our neck edge. If we divide it by 2, we get the number of decreased stitches to work on one side. So we can fill in number 3, decrease one stitch each neck edge a certain number of times. So that will be this number here. Finally, to figure out the number of stitches we're going to put on our stitch holder, we need to determine the number of decreased stitches that we use to create our neck opening and subtract from that the number of decreased stitches we'll use up on our neck edge decreases. Now the difference is the number of stitches that go on our holder in the center. So we'll start with our back neck width, add any ribbing for each side to get our neck opening, and we'll multiply that times our stitch gauge to get the stitches in our neck opening. We want to leave an even number of stitches to be divided equally between these two shoulders. If we have an odd number of stitches in our yoke here, we need to round this number to an odd number. If we have an even number of stitches in our yoke, we need this to be an even number. So we have what I'll call an adjusted number of stitches in our neckline opening, which is our total neck opening times our stitch gauge, and then rounded to an even or odd number depending on the number of stitches in our yoke. And our yoke, remember, is just the front of our sweater minus the stitches we worked, those decreased and bind off stitches we used in the armhole shaping. We're going to subtract 2 for our selvage stitches. And if you remember, the selvage stitch is the little stitch that gets used up when we pick up stitches for our ribbing. So if we subtract, we're going to get a new adjusted stitches in our neck opening. You might call that a final number of stitches. Now, from this number, we are going to subtract the number of decreased stitches that we got for our answer in number 3. Now that's the total number of decreased stitches, in other words, both sides. So if we subtract our neckline decreased stitches, we will get the number of stitches to put on our stitch holder. And that's the answer to number 2. So now we've filled in all our blanks. In part 2, we'll do the math on Nikki's sweater.